think a lot of clients are nervous that lawyers are the ones who get in the way of signing documents. They're like, you're going to tell me all of these things I can't do. You're telling me I can't sign this agreement. You're telling me it's going to take another couple of days to get, to be able to have the manufacturer start work. I think kind of reframing that into sort of like making sure that you're partnering with somebody that's going to be protective of you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Startup CPG Podcast. In our Slack channel, by far the most frequent questions are all around legal topics like, how do I set up my company? What are the watchouts? When I scale, what do I need to do? Today, we have got the pros from Giannuzzi Lewendon. They are a top-tier CPG law firm that works with over 3,000 CPG brands. They have seen it all, and they are about to answer all of the most frequent questions that we see. So, buckle up, get ready. There is so much knowledge that's about to be dropped in this episode. If you want to reach out to their team, again, this is what they do for a living. They help brands from inception to scale to hopefully an eventual transaction. You can reach out to either one of our presenters today, Adam and Gabrielle. It's Adam at glaw.us or Gabrielle, Gabrielle at glaw.us. It's in the show notes. All right, here we go. All right, everybody, here we go with a legal Ask Me Anything. Got a question? Just ask. In a pickle, let us know. If you're stuck, we're here. Don't you know you can ask us anything? And I'm going to ask you guys a lot of things today. So thank you for coming to the podcast. Thank you for sitting through my jingle also. Do you guys mind just doing a quick intro to get us started here? Adam, I'll start with you.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for having us. And we're pumped to be on again. So I'm Adam Marsh, one of the partners at Giannuzzi Lewendon. Excited to be here to answer any questions that have come up over on the Slack channel. We've been doing the CPG game for about 15 years now. I've been doing it for 12. So we've seen a lot of trials and tribulations. So hopefully we can give assistance to them.
And do you want to sing anything?
I do not. You don't
okay. Objection sustained, or whatever you say. All right, Gabby, over to you.
Yeah, hi, Gabby McGonagle. I started a couple years after Adam, so have been doing this for 10 years. And it's actually kind of a perfect set of topics for today, given that probably half of our job is advising clients and answering these very questions. So probably half of our day is spent doing that in addition to all the actual legal work. So excited to jump in.
All right. And I'm really excited to do this kind of an Ask Me Anything on this legal topic. We've done it on ops, we've done it on marketing, but really it's like the same questions over and over that we see in the Slack. And it's just great that now I think after we do this episode, we'll be able to point people towards this as a great resource to just help them get like those level one questions out of the way from people who just do this for a living, who do this all day. And, I think it would be probably hard to come up with a question you guys haven't heard before or even heard this week. So I'm excited to jump into this one. So what we've got here, these are questions that are mainly sourced from our Slack channel, which hopefully everybody who's listening to this has already joined. And that's what it's for brands to ask questions and get help. And the legal foundations is just one of the most important things that I think can really trip you up at the beginning. You get it wrong, you got to go back and undo stuff. It can be really complicated. And then you have to hire lawyers to undo the stuff that you didn't do because you were trying to avoid paying a lawyer. But we're just going to get all that good stuff out here today. So the first one, a recent question in the Slack was, I'm considering doing a family and friends round. What are the watchouts here? Because like if you're doing a proper institutional round, probably you do have a lawyer involved in that. Friends and family, you're thinking about it, you're like, that's kind of a gentle way to get into this. But I know that can be complicated because I've heard debrief afterwards when people have done it. So Adam, hit me. What's the stuff that people need to know?
Yeah, I got you. So, friends and family rounds are supposed to be easy, right? It's supposed to be a quick, dirty, easy way to bring in some capital. But I'd always recommend a few things. One is to start with a term sheet, or at least like an email where you kind of summarize what the terms are, right? So if you're doing a safe or a convertible note, or even a price round, you kind of have the terms laid out for your friends, your family, your neighbor. So everyone's kind of aligned from the get-go. And then the other thing I would say is to limit like the side deals, right? You're supposed to give everyone kind of the same treatment. What I really see hurting folks down the road is, they really need the extra 25 grand, right? And Uncle Vinny's going to do it, but it's going to come with a lot of strings attached to that. And that could just be hugely problematic because down the road, when you do your institutional round, Uncle Vinny might not be so helpful. So I have an example, like, I just in December closed a Series A financing. The client came to us for that. They had done 2 rounds of friends and family, and they had these 2 side letters. One was with their dad, and the investor was saying, we're not doing the deal until these side letters are terminated. Dad terminated, no big deal. Then they just had a family friend who refused to terminate the side letter. And it literally held up the process because he was asking for additional rights that, he shouldn't really have been entitled to had he been treated the same as everybody else. So I'd say, limit those side letters, treat everyone the same, because I know that extra, $10, $15, $20,000 could really help, but down the road, it could really hurt things. And that deal almost stopped.
And so on that first point that you made about like have some kind of terms at least out there, what would be an example of someone not having terms? Like, is just like, hey, yeah, I'll give you 1% of my company for this amount, write the check, and like that's all. That's kind of a handshake. Or what are some ways to not do that?
Yeah, so like I'm thinking about if you're doing a friends and family round, you're doing like a safer convertible note. So have what the discount is, right? Say it's a 20% discount. Have what the cap is. Just those minor things will make sure that everyone is aligned for the future so that, again, you're not cutting side deals with everyone. Everyone's kind of aligned so they know what they're getting themselves into. They know how much the company intends to raise and that everyone's treated the same way.
Okay. And in the instances where that can go bad, because we know it can, like friends and family, great. I would say in my experience, it seems like they don't give you as hard of a time on things like valuation, due diligence. They believe in you or they like your story or the product, something like that can be a great way to get going. But I also have heard people express regret because they're like, I might not do that again. I've got like 100 family and friends on my cap table. It's kind of messy. And now I'm not friends with Uncle Vinny anymore. So like, later on, you can have these sticky things that can happen, right? Because like maybe the terms weren't clear or people can sour on it or maybe just feel like I don't know, like maybe they turned out to not all be accredited investors, stuff like that. Are these some of the kind of things that can go wrong after a family and friends round?
100%. Sometimes you hear stories of families members not speaking to each other afterwards. But, sometimes that's just what is required to keep your company alive and thriving, right? So sometimes you can't be picky about who you take your money from. You're going to take 50 grand from whoever's going to give you 50 grand. So hopefully if you have the right legal support, you don't run into these hiccups and everything goes smoothly and everyone's expectations are aligned, right? They know what they're getting into. But we've seen it all and we've definitely seen, friends no longer speaking, family members no longer speaking, but hopefully it doesn't come to that.
Also a reason to not promise all of those things in side letters because those are the promises that you typically can't keep down the line when you do have institutional investors come in who want that stuff removed. So to Adam's point, circulating sort of a short list of this is what I'm raising under. If you want in, great. If you don't, all good, but not giving away extra things to extra people because that's when things typically get a little bit messier when you can't deliver on some of those early promises that you hoped would pan out but didn't quite.
It's a tough one. I've written angel investment checks and had them not go well. And I don't know, at least for me, I would say some of the relationships that I had with people have been damaged. But mainly it actually is because they just didn't give updates. Like when I write a check, I'm like, probably this will be worth zero, but I believe in this person. I'm excited to be part of this journey. Let me do it. But then you just don't hear from them for like a couple of years. You're like, what did you even do with that money? Like, did you work on this business actually? Like, did you really go for it? I like wrote you a big check. What happened with that? And I honestly feel like I wouldn't mind if it's a friend and they're like, look, I tried it. Like we both knew the risk. It didn't work. Here are the reasons it didn't work. Okay. I feel like I could take that and sustain the relationship. It's just the communication part. I feel like people might take for granted when it's their family and friends and not just get into that habit of, quarterly updates, whatever it is. What do you think? Do you think that's one of the potential solves?
I mean, client relations is just a whole nother spectrum of things you got to think about when you're raising capital, right? You bring in the money, you bring in the $500,000 and you're so excited and you get to work. But then, yeah, to your point, Daniel, like you got to keep people updated. You got to keep people in the loop so they know what their money's going to. And you're right, they don't all succeed. But, to your point, it's imperative that you keep people, even if it's just an email once a quarter being, here are our sales, here's the stores we got into. Your investors appreciate that so much.
Yes. I mean, yes, I really appreciate that, especially the brands where they just did it and they always said, here's what we did, here's what we're going to do. And then they did it. Like that's an ideal scenario. They just keep hitting their projections, but I understand it won't always. But yes, I really like that good communication. I wish that for all of the brands out there, even though it's a hard thing to do. But yeah. Okay, so I have another question for you. Let's say you actually get down that journey. Yeah, it can be hard to raise money. Maybe you do a couple friends and family rounds. And then later, okay, you're going in to actually get maybe a more institutional type VC. What's going to be the difference there? So I've gotten friends and family where they didn't really ask me a lot of questions, probably in that instance, maybe just revenue. I don't know, a couple things that they knew to ask. I think often also if you're just saying like, oh, we use a safe, then you're like, okay, that's fine then. You may not ask a ton of questions, but an institutional VC will. So what do you think they're going to really ask for that I might not be prepared for? What's the process going to be like?
Yeah, I guess I'll kind of piggyback on my last one. Sorry, Gavin. But there's a few things that will make it a lot less painful, I would say. So the first one is I would say start building your data room early, right? So for every employee, have a folder with their offer letter, and if you've given them incentive equity and their NDA, or have all of your broker agreements in a separate folder in your Dropbox, right? And every manufacturing contract, every consulting agreement might seem tedious to build that out kind of as they're going. What's a lot more tedious is when you have the Series A investor on the hook and they're asking you, they're going to ask you hundreds of diligence questions. And then you're going to have to go back to your files for the past 3 years and try to dig all this up. So if you are kind of doing it purposely from the beginning, it'll make the diligence process go a lot better. And I can't tell you, like our clients hate the diligence process the most. The back and forth on the purchase agreement is way less painful than answering hundreds of diligence questions over the course of a month. And then, I think, I think the other big thing is, you're going to hear me, I guess I'm kind of repeating this, but have a term sheet, right? Sometimes you get that LOI from the investor and you agree on, the amount of the raise and the valuation. Then you're like, all right, let's go right into those long form documents. And those are two great things to agree on, but there's so much more that goes into these like NVCA forms that in the long term, if you make that LOI go from 2 pages to 7 pages, because you're negotiating the size of the board, what blocking rights they have, down round protections, information rights, right? If you negotiate all those stuff at the onset and that LOI goes from 2 to 7 pages, it's so much more efficient and cost effective than negotiating those in the long form agreements, because those are 5 30-page documents. Right? So doing the work at the beginning will save you so much hassle at the end.
Okay. And real quick, because I know you do work with both brands and investors in this big CPG space of ours, but just give us the insider tricks real quick. If you're a brand, if you, Adam, are a brand, what are you fighting for in that 7-page doc? What are a couple of the things that you're like, these are the killer terms, if you can get them, fight for it?
Size of the board, and frankly, the control rights that investor has. That is 90% of the game in my mind, right?
And what should you want? You want a big board, a small board?
You want a small board, you want to control the board, and you want them to a limited set of blocking rights, right? Because they're used to being in control. You've been the founder, you've run day to day, you've done all the blocking and tackling. You haven't had to listen to anybody. And now all of a sudden, we've got 1 or 2 people sitting on your board. We're going to tell you no, right? So that's like a tough pill for a founder to swallow. So to understand that the board's going to be small, it's a 5-person board. Maybe you control 3 of those 5 votes, and they have a block on 7 things you can't do as opposed to 20, because that's what they're going to put in their first draft of the shareholders agreement, right? So to be able to still control your next round of financings, when you can sell the company, how much debt you can take on, All these things, when you're the founder all alone, you don't even think about it, right? But then once you have someone's check for $5 million, you have someone else to answer to. Those are the types of things that you really want to negotiate hard.
Yeah, that makes sense. Gabby, anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, I think it's just, this is one of the reasons it's so important not to give stuff away to friends and family round, because the protective provisions that you lose grow and grow and grow and grow. So if you've given Uncle Vinnie a bunch of blocking rights, and maybe you've said, hey, when we do our next round, you'll get a board seat. Then when you actually are raising the institutional money, they're going to say, well, if you've already given this guy a board seat, I want 2. And you've given this guy 5 blocking rights, so I want 10. And so if you're not able to do those early rounds really without giving much away, it just makes it all that more sort of punitive when you are taking in that institutional money.
And my guess is that it's probably some combination for early stage brands of just doing what they have to do when people ask for things and securing that capital, but also just being excited and feeling grateful that people took a bet on them of like, yeah, Uncle Vinnie, for sure. By the way, I want to thank you for this trust that you're placing in me, and I want to give you a board seat. And that's the part where I really encourage everybody to just be measured about it and think about it and talk to advisors, because, it can handcuff you later. When just this very generous, beautiful sentiment that you had early on, it can come back. And, when you watch like The Social Network and stuff like that, that's what a lot of these very harsh things that they're doing are probably trying to undo. Some of these things that were just done kind of naively in the early stages of the business. So hopefully when you have that instinct, you will talk to somebody like Adam or Gabby. Be like, hey, is this a terrible idea? It is? Okay. Okay. So Gabby, I wanted to ask you, a lot of people in the Slack ask this question, like, hey, I have an advisor for the business, or I want to bring on this advisor, and I am thinking about giving them equity instead of cash, maybe because I'm being really scrappy, or maybe they asked for it, or maybe they just have been helping me out and I really want to show some gratitude. How could I do that in an early stage where it will make sense and not get me into one of these messes?
Yeah, I think luckily there are a lot of great ways to do it. For a corp, we mostly see stock options or restricted stock. For LLCs, profit interest grants. I think one of the most important things is to decide what success looks like for that advisor. So if you're bringing in somebody who you want to help out with sales, maybe you have the vesting of equity happen based on hitting those certain sales targets, as opposed to just you're going to vest over 2 years. Or if you're bringing in a CFO, maybe it's certain revenue targets or something like that. So I think really making sure that the parties are aligned on what the role is, what success looks like, and what the commitment is. Because the beauty of that sort of incentive equity is it is very flexible. You can really tailor it around whatever role it is. Where we see things kind of get a little bit hairy is when you sign somebody up to do consulting for you and they're going to vest over 2 years and there's not really a fleshed out set of services. And so you look back 18 months in, they haven't really done anything for you, but you're not really in a position to terminate either because you haven't defined what it is they haven't done. So really aligning on those expectations. I think the other thing is depending on the life of the company, if it's really, really early stage, maybe hiring a big time CFO isn't going to be in the budget, right? And so then, if you really need that person to take off, maybe you give them a little bit of equity. Maybe you're giving them a little bit more than you would in a later stage because they're going to be diluted by a lot, right? Like if you are bringing someone on to help you with a fundraise, that then they're going to get diluted by 10% of new money coming in. Those are sort of considerations you have to have. So I think the big things are, again, aligning on what success looks like and also being honest about sort of where you are in the life of your company and what you really need to grow in that moment.
I can just see, I've never done this. I never had advisors who were just on equity, but I could feel myself being in that position of, okay, I brought this person on because they have a nice skill set and I just gave them some equity to save money because I didn't know in the early days what was going to happen exactly with his business. And that felt like a free way to get their help instead of an expensive retainer. But then, yeah, we didn't totally define it. And they're like a little bit helpful, but they aren't really out there doing a job for me. But it feels like almost free because I'm just giving up this little invisible share of my company consistently. And but it's also hard to cut off because maybe there's something right around the corner that they're helping me with a little bit. So it seems like similar advice of just like have those terms. What if you're going to do it, right? Write it out.
Right. And the other big thing is it depending on when they're coming in, like if this is an early stage company before you're doing a big fundraise, you have a little bit more flexibility because they're really diluting you. As you get sort of further in, when you have a bunch of people who have been writing checks, they may want to limit what the incentive equity pool is. So usually we see an incentive equity pool of somewhere between 10 and 15%. If you're giving away a bunch of equity and all of a sudden you have 20% of your company going to sort of consultants and advisors, the people who wrote checks may be a little displeased by being diluted by a bunch of sweat equity. So you do also need to be a little bit mindful of not giving away too much and thinking it's sort of free services, because that equity equates to real dollars if you have check writers involved.
Yeah, I would love to know some of the reactions you've seen when you've done due diligence and shown investors businesses with all of these random line items on for sweat equity. They're like, what is this bullshit? Like, what?
Well, it's one of the big blocking rights that Adam was sort of referring to earlier. When you get strategic investors that come in, they will make sure that they are limiting what your incentive pool looks like, particularly if they're coming in and they've seen you've already given quite a bit away. So definitely something to be mindful of.
All right, that makes sense. And it's a world that I don't know a lot about, but seems like they have learned that lesson the hard way. Okay, so here's a question that we get a lot. In the Slack, people are always asking for lawyers, actually. Like, hey, I need somebody to do my business entity registration or help me restructure from whatever LLC and do a C Corp, stuff like that, or just, do basic stuff. And a lot of times they're asking like, hey, and I'm not looking for like a big firm. I'm looking for, an individual lawyer or something like that. And for me, actually, I had like a business once upon a time. I just set it up on LegalZoom.com. So my question is the following. For these brands that are just starting out, is that an okay route to go? You guys, obviously, you're a top tier law firm and all you do is CPG and you're going to get it right. You have all the expertise in the world, but also you're a firm and you guys are smart, educated people with great degrees. They got to pay you. There's overhead at the firm. It's probably going to be more expensive than picking off a small independent freelancer lawyer or whatever. I know you must get asked this or think about it all the time from brands who are just trying to figure this out. Do I go with somebody small and scrappy? Do I just go with the blue chip? How do you think brands should think about that when they're in the early stages?
Probably a little biased here, but I would always recommend hiring a law firm. It doesn't have to be the crevasse, the white shoe law firms of New York City. We're a 25-person boutique law firm. But you can also, if it's simple corporate formation, you can use the general practitioner down the street. What I would kind of avoid, Daniel, you could tell me how your LegalZoom experience went, but maybe avoid the LegalZoom just because it doesn't cost a law firm very much to do this. Reach out to them, ask them for a quote, and they'll tell you, right? If they're going to tell you it's going to cost you $2,000, sometimes more, sometimes less, right? But just ask the firm, because when you go the LegalZoom route, sometimes the mistakes that are made are going to cost you a lot more to unwind and to fix. So, unless you're feeling very confident LegalZoom, maybe don't go that route. Definitely don't need to hire a big time law firm. For basic stuff, you can, again, hire a general practitioner, but more often than not, definitely recommend hiring a lawyer who's experienced enough that does this on a day-to-day basis. Jenny mentioned converting from a Delaware LLC to a Delaware C Corp, but that gets even more involved, and the process there has to be right. So definitely want a legal professional to help with that. But also, like when you're starting your company, oftentimes you don't just stop the formation, right? You need the other documents, right? The governing documents or a stock option plan or incentive plan like Gabby talked about. So when you start thinking about that, right, you definitely want someone with industry experience that knows how to set you up for success in the long run. And even that costs you, an extra $2,000 or $3,000, I think they'll put your company in a better position for long-term success.
Thank you. I know, of course, yeah, you guys are a blue chip CPG law firm, and probably everybody wishes they had the luxury of getting to work with you from day one. And but sometimes they need the initial traction to get to the point where they can get the funding also to then have all of the service that they want. So I appreciate being able to have that kind of a discussion, because it's the thing that's on brands' minds when they're figuring out who they can and should work with, and like, wow, are we going to go for this? Is it a luxury we can't afford right now, or is it essential?
I would definitely recommend people literally go to a lawyer and ask them for a quote. Like, the way our firm works, like, we think about this as a long-term partnership. We're not in it to make a quick buck. So I'll give you a quote, and if I charge you 2x what I quoted you, then this partnership wasn't meant to be, right? So whether it's me or another lawyer, ask them for a quote and make sure they stay within that budget, and then maybe you have someone who could be a long-term partner for you.
I like it. You make it sound very approachable. So ask for quotes, people. All right. Okay. Next question that I have, Gabby. What are some of the top things that I might get sued for as I'm growing my brand? I really like this question because, it's not fun to get sued or to get a threat from some lawyer out there somewhere. There are a lot of different things that could make that happen to you. So what are just some of the basics that brands should know and maybe get ahead of?
Yeah, so I think first is, if you ever get that letter, relax, reach out to your lawyer. Don't sit on it. Don't ignore it. We've seen that too, where clients are like, well, I didn't really take it seriously. And then an action's pursued. But Adam can tell you, we get tons of clients who get forwarded some class action letter. And there are firms that really just churn those letters out. So take a breath, talk to your lawyer, make sure that it's even something legitimate or something that's really going to sort of manifest into something. But I think the big things that we see, one is somebody claims that they were promised equity 3 years ago and never got it papered, and I created this logo for you. You said I owned 5% of the company. So anything where you're sort of generally talking to somebody who might be providing a service and you're throwing out a percentage, that's one of those things that you want to sort of stay away from. Kind of touched on this, but with branding, like if you have anybody, especially, we see this all the time, someone early stage, or maybe it was even almost like a co-founder, like two kids in their dorm come up with an idea. One drew out the logo, one was doing all of the sort of testing and kind of tinkering with the formulas, and then they part ways. And 5 years later, or right before an exit, you hear from this former person that says, wait a minute, I actually own some of this IP. You can't sell this company without me. So I think those are two of the big ones. The other thing I would just advise every client to do, and this is not sort of self-promoting, because we don't actually do sort of labeling review or that sort of regulatory work, but get your labels reviewed by people who really know what they're doing in this industry. We can give you recommendations if you need them. But if you're going out and selling product and you have things that haven't been vetted, those are the things that are not only sort of very easy to get called out on, but almost always losers for the brand, because there is a very particular way that you do need to advertise your brand and that you do need to disclose sort of what's in the product and where it's made and those sorts of things. So I think the one to take sort of the most seriously from the jump is getting all of that label work done.
I like that answer a lot, though, and definitely people should be cautious at the early stage of the kind of things that they're throwing out. And even if you just start working with a co-founder, it can be very complicated, especially if you don't formalize anything very quickly about what happens if that person who drew the logo is like, no, I'm still involved, but I'm taking this other job, but I'm still involved. Well, it's not 50-50 then? Are they going to keep working on it? You're going to keep working on it? What's going to happen? Those discussions probably only get more complicated the longer you wait to have them. So I would say that's my advice, is for my advice for somebody who's an early stage brand is just really try to do things properly from the beginning, write things down, try to have it clear. And even in some instances, you may not need a lawyer for that, even of just like, great, let's just write down on a piece of paper, here's what I'm going to do. Here's what you're going to do. Here's how we think about this. If one of us leaves, here's what happens.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I will say this is one of the reasons sort of not to use LegalZoom is, what Adam was touching on, like, what about governance? There are lawyers who think about these things. I think it's the when we see things go wrong, obviously when you're first starting a brand, it's a love fest, right? Everything's great. You have this great new idea. It's exciting. CPG entrepreneurship, it's tough. It's a grind. And when you're working day in and day out and maybe things aren't materializing as quickly as you want to, you see those sort of fun relationships fracture a little bit. So making sure, again, whether it's from a lawyer or not, but even just having a written document, even if you were putting it together yourself with you and the person you're starting this out with, of what it looks like when it's great, what's going to happen if you guys decide to part ways. Those sort of things are really important to sort of get on the same page with early in the stage of your company.
I like it. And I've seen this go so bad just in this CPG world of ours where people didn't understand really what would happen. Co-founders, just, it's really good to be clear about it. I also, I think when I say LegalZoom to a lawyer, typically lawyers recoil the same way if you were like talking to your doctor about WebMD, like, well, it says this, then I'm an expert now also. But I don't think it went great when I used LegalZoom, but I was a, 4-digit revenue kind of company, and that's what you got to do in that kind of an instance. So, now I would always go the lawyer route. Okay. So here is another question that we get all the time in the Slack, which brands are asking. Hey, I just got sent this agreement from a distributor, and there is some wild stuff in here. It looks very scary. And I think when they send it to you, usually it has every single thing in the world in their favor. And like, if you ever leave me, by the way, you owe me not just your firstborn, but their firstborn and everything else forever into infinity. So when you're just starting to scale your distribution, Adam, what do you think are just some of the key things you should be looking at? What kind of things can you ask for as a brand versus you should be just so scared to ask because you're so desperate to get into the distributor you're worried about?
Yeah, well, I'd say, it kind of depends, right? So if you're looking at a broad line or like US Foods or Cisco or someone like Hehe or Unify, like, to be honest with you, you're not going to get many changes or maybe any changes, right? They're not going to allow much pushback. But with, the DSD network, if you go that route, you'll be surprised about how open to negotiation they really are. And it's always a function of leverage, right? If you're a bigger company, you're going to have more leverage than, a brand new company who has no distribution, right? But even those brand new companies still get comments accepted all the time. So, there's a few things, I built the Body Armor distribution network. Gabby built the Essential distribution network. We've done a lot of distribution agreements in our day. But so, yeah, like to your point, like looking at the termination fee, if someone tells you that a 5x termination fee is market, I'm going to be able to pull up that same agreement that we negotiated 3 times, be like, well, you agreed to 2x last year, right? So to be able to go to someone who has experience, that doesn't necessarily be a lawyer, but industry experience that can point to, distribution agreements in the same area or with the same distributor, it really arms you for success. I think the other big thing, other than termination fees, are just the concept of exclusivity, right? These distributors want you to be their exclusive distributor in the territory. But there are some accounts that they can't service, right? There's some accounts that you already have somebody with, like you go direct to, right? So you're going to want to carve them out from their exclusivity of the contract. But that can be a pretty, they understand that. They understand that they can't service everyone in the territory. But if you don't ask for it, they're not going to give it to you. So I really try to find carve-outs to exclusivity. Are they asking for invasion fees? Are you going to ask for transshipping fees? What kind of marketing expenses are you responsible for? Are they responsible for? Like, what services are they actually providing? Sometimes they just say, we'll deliver to accounts in the territory. how often do they have to visit those accounts? If they don't visit account, can I go direct to them? So like putting actual objectives and deliverables into the contract for the distributor, I think is pretty important. And then lastly, like the assignability provision, and it doesn't just go for a DSD contract, but really any contract, it should say, you can't assign this agreement except in the change of control or company sale, then I can assign it to my acquirer, right? So those are like kind of the big ticket items I would think about. But they often do throw the kitchen sink at you. But don't be afraid to push back, especially with like more regional, smaller distributors.
Yeah, I think you hit on all the points that I went through negotiating with DSDs in my life. And yeah, I think UNFI, KHE, those people, like not much I think that we managed to get done there, especially as an early brand that does not have much leverage with them at that point. I think with smaller distributors, yeah, those were the main points of contention. And they might throw something on there like, you owe us 3 years of revenue if you ever leave us. And I really appreciate what you're saying. There are people out there who know what you could negotiate them down to, but that information is not available anywhere centrally. There's no database of agreements that they've done with everybody. The lawyers who are very active in the space, like you guys, probably know some of it. You can ask in our Slack channel, for example, and see if anybody has a history there. There are people in this CPG game who just know. They're told things by everybody. It's good if you can figure out how to get them on your speed dial list. I've definitely used that help. Or even maybe you figure out another brand that works with them and see if you have a backdoor reference there. Like, what'd you guys get done?
Yeah, go to the stores in the area and maybe you can find out, there's Poppy on the shelf. All right, let's get into, maybe Bobby's a bad example. But, there's XYZ beverage brand on the shelf. Let's get in touch with their ops guy to see, who they used and how much they paid.
I like that a lot. I think LinkedIn you could also probably use because most brands like me like to celebrate their success and gains. And when you get a cool new distributor, you probably post on LinkedIn about it. So there's probably some hashtag sleuthing that you could do there to figure out your way into it. And I would if a brand asked me that, I would say, give me a call. And I would say to them on the phone, don't you ever tell anybody that I shared any of this with you. But yeah, here are some things that I managed to negotiate with them because I appreciate your position. But again, we never had this conversation. And I don't, hopefully there's nothing in the contract that is like a NDA type thing that says you can't do that, of course. But and maybe, sometimes people will give you a non-attributed type background, and it can make all the difference, right? Because who knows, later on, maybe you're hoping to get acquired, as so many companies are in our space someday, and they might look at some contract that you've signed, like you said, 5 years of revenue. What are you, crazy?
Yeah, I mean, if you get on the blue truck or the red truck, right, they're going to make you terminate all those DSD agreements, right? Or not all of them, but most of them. And, there's going to be a termination fee associated with all of those, right? And that's just money that's not going in to the founder or the shareholder's pocket. So, of course, you want to keep those termination fees as small as you can with a understanding of, what's customary and what's not.
Yeah. And you mentioned a couple terms like exclusivity. Okay, you work with a DSD in one area. They might say we want every single account there. And it can get complicated because there might be a national retailer that you're working with or a regional one that just has 2 little stores in their area. And you're like, I can't have you service those. The buyer is going to throw a fit if I'm like, hey, we're going to work with UNFI except for these 2 stores. Can you set up this one distributor you don't really know for this? It's going to be tough. And so that's when you would ask for things like, can we have a carve out for certain retailers that I know I need these broadliners to service? And that's where, hey, maybe there is that invasion fee that you mentioned where, okay, yeah, but every time somebody who's not me delivers a case in my region, you owe me $1 or something like that. But I think if you don't ask for it, you're not going to get it. And you also, I think you don't always know what they really care about because probably in the contract they send you, they ask for everything. And then only when you start having the back and forth, they're like, yeah, oh no, totally. We can do 2 years instead of 3 years. That's no problem. Like, okay. But they really seem to care about this other thing. I don't know. My school of negotiations for me was always about trying to figure out how to get to the best mutually beneficial outcome, which a lot of that is just figuring out what do both people care the most about and having more of a cards face up type approach to it. But some other people have gotten better success than me.
No, you're totally right. And frankly, you don't get what you don't ask for, right? So stick a schedule on the back and say, I need to go direct to GNC and all these gyms and every sports stadium, right? And more often than not, they're going to agree to some version of that because they're right? We can't service that. And if you are in those accounts, it's helping build the brand's awareness, right? So in the long term, it might actually be beneficial for them, but they're not going to give it to you unless you ask for it.
And if you're at that stage where you're negotiating with them, they like your brand, or there's something in it that they feel like will be a good business opportunity for them. So even though you might feel like it's your lucky day that a distributor would consider you, they are considering you. They're talking to you, and their time is valuable, and their time poring over contracts is valuable. So at that stage, they want to make it work. So that, that's a good thing to keep in mind. So Gabby, let me ask you same question, but more about co-mans, because I think very similarly early on, you're like, hooray, I found a co-man who will take me to the dance. Like they can make this product that I love and we're going to get out there. But it can go so badly when things go wrong. So what are the things that are going to be most likely to burn a brand?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is obviously owning the IP. So whatever the formula is, whatever the recipes are, all of that, you need to make sure that you own that brand. We've seen sort of you get to an exit, there's some really vague language in the IP section. And maybe it's not even the manufacturer who's saying like, hey, by the way, I own the formula. I did the R&D. That's all mine. But you'll have a buyer who says, we don't feel really confident about this language. And we need you to go back to that manufacturer and make them clean up that language. And now you've given the manufacturer leverage and you've sort of planted this seed that they never had on their own. So I think really making sure from the beginning that it's very clear that you own the IP, including, any modifications made after that, any enhancements, because with most good co-packing relationships, you're going to have tweaks to the products. You're going to have changes over the years. You'll have manufacturers sometimes who will say like, hey, by the way, if we add this, it'll have a creamier consistency or it'll be a little bit more shelf stable or whatever it is. And you want to make sure that you own every part of that. So I think IP for sure is the most important thing to be buttoned up. From an operational standpoint, kind of like with distribution agreements, a lot of manufacturers, if not most manufacturers, are going to want an exclusive relationship. It's really important to have certain carve outs for if we need certain changes made to the specifications that you can't make, we need to be able to go elsewhere. If you can't handle our demand, if we're sending you forecasts and you say, we can probably get you 3/4 of this, you need to be able to go somewhere else to get whatever that additional product is. So making sure that, sure, maybe it's going to be an exclusive relationship for so long as they can provide you with everything that you need provided. But if they can't, for whatever reason, that you're able to go elsewhere and make sure that your product can get made. And I think the last thing is being really buttoned up with compliance, making sure that they're repping to compliance with law, not only in the way that they're manufacturing the product, but in the way they're storing it and handling it and the shape that their facilities are in. So those, I think, are the 3 big buckets.
I like those a lot. And those are some of that I actually have not heard before. So especially the provision around it, by the way, if you can't make this product, because I would never think about it that way instinctively. Like, here's the product that I need you to make. You can make it, yes or no. But things can change. Almost every product does change over time. Whether you realize, it's a beverage, I need it to be more carbonated, or it's a food product, and it turns out that actually the way that we're making it, we could save a lot more money if we had this different process involved, or the buyer is telling me that there's a problem with the consistency now on the long run, and I need to change to some other process. But I've never had an agreement stipulation that was like, yeah, if you can no longer make the product that we need to be sellable, then I can go somewhere else. I could see them, especially once you're building the business up and the co-man is taking a chance on you and they want that business. And they're like, no, like we can do that. And we just need 3 months to get this new equipment. And by the way, then learn how to do it. And there'll be a lot of spoilage when we do that. So you don't have that flexibility because they want the business at that point.
We had a client recently who they went to the facility. They had all the product tested. They were tasting it live. Everything was great. It turns out when it sat on the shelf for a month, the consistency separated and they had all of these customer returns. And there was nothing in their contract that gave them an out if they couldn't make the necessary changes. And this production facility could not add the additional ingredients that were necessary to stop that from happening. And there was no out of the contract. And they had a huge buyout. And it was a nightmare for the brand because they also, in addition to having a huge buyout to be able to terminate the contract, went months with a bunch of customer returns and no way to make the product that they actually needed made. So it can be a big issue if you run into that.
What a horror story that is. Can you
Yeah,
imagine
a bit of
like
one. It was, yeah.
like you can't make it and now I have to pay you to not make it and I can't even get it made. That's the opposite of what everybody dreams of doing in this business. Oh my gosh. And so, yeah, how would you avoid something like that? Because probably from the co-man's perspective, they're like, this is your fault because you didn't figure out that you shouldn't be making a product that way and that it's not going to work. That's not our responsibility. We made the thing you told us to make the way that you told us to make it. And so they don't have the same culpability probably that you do. Because, yeah, probably they did do the thing that you asked them to do. It just turns out that doesn't work.
Yeah, it's another reason to be really specific about your specifications. You'll see there's certain clients that will give you a set of specifications and it might have, a list of ingredients. Others will say, this is exactly what we want the consistency to be. This is what we expect the shelf life to be. So more is more always when you're talking about specifications, because almost every manufacturing agreement will say, we're going to make it in accordance with the specifications. But if your specifications are very bare bones, there's not a lot to point to when something goes wrong, as opposed to if they're really in depth and really detailed, then you have a lot more to say, look, this is what we agreed the product would taste like, the consistency would be, shelf it, all of these things, and it's not measuring up. So there's only a breach of contract if there's something that they're supposed to be doing. So the more specific you can be with that stuff, the better.
I like it. And I really encourage people not to shy away from specific specifications. Because you probably feel like, oh no, like I don't want to be a pain in the butt and tell them all these things. They're going to be so annoyed. I actually have never seen a co-man mind any of that. They're equipped to do it.
Right. Or the client just assumes that it's obvious, like, well, of course we wanted it not to separate after a month. Which I'm not saying in the specifications you'd say, make sure it doesn't separate, but, specifying the different elements and what you expect it to look like. And also I think it's great when you can go to the facility and try the product, but also having it shipped, doing the different tests over a course of time is really valuable.
I wonder who is the person that could have told them that was going to happen. Maybe it's just an operations consultant who's worked on those kind of products before that could say, like, if you make it this way, it's going to separate. Just because they happen to have seen that. I've had problems in the past. I felt like just being too cheap to pony up for a proper consultant at the beginning, because the formulator isn't necessarily going to know that stuff either, because if they're not someone who does a lot of that commercialization scale up, they may not have seen it through what happens with their formula. They make a great bench formula. I don't know. That is a tough one. Okay, so now let's just imagine a world for a little while where it goes really well and you just skate through all of these issues and your brand is really successful. And I know every time we talk to brands and like, why are you doing this? Like, no, I'm doing it because of this problem that I had when I was a kid and I'm trying to solve that for the world. And like, I have no plans to ever sell this business. But like the reality is most people are actually trying to build towards some kind of an eventual exit. We've seen a lot of them happen lately that we all applaud as, we love when they're good outcomes because it's very promising for early stage brands. When strategics are buying brands, that means that there's a market out there. That means earlier stage VCs sees that there is a good return out there and they're more likely to invest. So like, good, we get all the juices flowing in the industry. We love it. Let's say you're in that wonderful situation where that happens. And all of a sudden, like maybe you're even running out of money and all of a sudden, oh, there's an out. There's somebody that wants to buy you. I've seen this happen. What are the things that might actually throw a complete wrench in the wheel of that transaction? And how could you avoid that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one that comes to mind for me, we had a great exit. The company did phenomenally and did not have a buttoned up manufacturing agreement. So kind of getting to that a different issue, but kind of one I touched on earlier, which was the manufacturers said, I own the formula. And it was a week before we closed the transaction, and it was effectively a six-figure ransom of I'll give you the rights, I'll sign whatever you want if I get this six-figure check. And the buyer wasn't going to close around it, rightfully so, because for the acquirer, they're buying the brand, they're buying the recipe. I mean, sure, they're usually getting inventory and things like that, but what they're really buying is the formula and the branding. So if you don't have that really cleanly buttoned up, it can be a very expensive sort of hold up at the end.
Okay, let me ask you a question on that because I feel like the way it typically happens, you're going to a co-man with your formula. Like, great, make this. Okay, cool. But I know things can change, right? Because there can be a lot of IP around the process. You talked a little bit about some of that stuff before, but I'm just making this up. But let's just say you're, Beyond Meat, somebody like that. They're like maybe the formula, like the ingredients is just a portion of that story. There's so much in the actual processing of the ingredients, the treatment of the product, so many things that are so key in there. So, like, is it that kind of a situation where it might not be clear who actually owns the IP around a formula? Or could it be so basic as like, oh, no, I went to the co-man. They said they would make this for me. I didn't realize that meant they owned it.
Yeah, so I would say the vast majority of our clients, their products are unique in formula, but not necessarily proprietary in process. So you don't run into that a lot. If you have something that's particularly proprietary, then that's something, if you don't own the formula or the process of it itself, you need to at least have an exclusive right to it. So we had one client who had a very proprietary ingredient in one of their sauces, and there was only one manufacturer in the US who could even make it. It was just a very unique process. There was very unique machinery that was required to actually do it. And we didn't own the process, but we did have sort of like a perpetual exclusive right to use it. It obviously for a fee. But where it was so proprietary, that was something that was negotiated and that worked. And that client was super buttoned up. They knew this was a client who had an exit previously, and so made sure when he was going into it that all the T's were crossed and all the I's were dotted. So luckily for them, that was something that they had. But more times than not, the process itself isn't typically the thing that needs to be protected. It's the formula or the specification.
I really like this topic because I feel like it's somewhat like having a prenup. I don't know. I feel like I'm not married, but growing up, I always felt like, oh, that's like you would never have that. That would be just like such a crazy thing to have to actually need with somebody, and you just like plan on it going great. And I feel like a lot of CPG founders are just like, no, it's going to go great. And they don't spend the time really worrying about these kind of things. But like, if you actually don't take the time and document some of this stuff, like later on when things need to be unraveled, it can be so complicated. And I've just seen this with people in my life that it can really have a huge impact on your everyday forever after that, because it was not clear in the beginning, like what would happen if things unraveled in business, in life, so many different ways. And so I really, really like, Gabby, you giving some of these specific examples, because this is real. Like, this can happen to you. If it goes well, all of a sudden there's a lot of money on the table. People start going back to, well, was it in writing?
Right. And that's why we always say, hopefully you'll never have to look at this again. But if there is some sort of dispute, when you do have to look back at it, you want to make sure that somebody has looked at these very particular issues. I think Adam and I have talked about this before, but because we do so much M&A as a firm, it's actually really changed the way we look at commercial contracts, because usually when you get to that stage, that's when these issues start to really rear their heads. And so we've been able to, as a firm, really look at our commercial agreements and make sure that they're set up for that big moment when it's the exciting exit, not wanting anything to be a foot fault there.
It's the best thing, I think, just to hopefully then have good relationships with everyone at the end, of just like, whatever it is, we all understand what happens. It's been laid out. It's clear. Everyone can make decisions based off that. And then hopefully it avoids a lot of nastiness that can happen when everybody realizes what's on the table at the end. Adam, you must have some stuff to add on this topic.
Well, I was going to say whether it's, a sale process or a Series A or a Series B, just be honest, right? Because this is your partner, right? So during the diligence process, I would just encourage everyone just to be honest and get ahead of any issues that might arise. Now, literally like 2 weeks ago, I just sold a company for a substantial amount of money. And we're supposed to close on Friday morning at 9 a.m. And Thursday at 8 p.m., we find out about this, related party relationship, right, with a contract and the buyer is insisting, right? We just found that out, 12 hours before we're closing, and the buyer is insisting that contract be terminated because they don't want to deal with, I'll call him Uncle Joey this time, but don't want to deal with Uncle Joey and his, understanding and agreement with the company. So we're up till 4 a.m. trying to close this deal, but also trying to satisfy everyone with getting out of this with this, agreement with an uncle, right? So, but if we could have gone ahead of this, weeks, months before, right? So I think just being open, being honest, if you're doing a Series A, these are going to be your partners for the next 5 years. So don't try to sweep anything under the rug. Be open and honest. It's going to save you from getting sued down the road, but also it just builds trust, and you want that in a long-term partner.
Yeah. I don't have enough experience in this area to know from a brand perspective of, okay, let's say like in general, when a brand is showing projections to investors, I feel like if you go back a number of years, especially with all of the hype that was happening in the CPG world and crazy valuations, people were just going to show an inflated number and it was going to be crazy. And you just kind of had to know that. And then they might change it over time. And, people aren't seeing the same deck a bunch of times, so they can just kind of do that. It gets very tricky because in some instances it's like, well, they would never look at this if we didn't show those kind of numbers, even though like, hey, maybe we all know that it's going to come in lower than that. I don't know. It's a tough one to know, but I mean, I personally, someone gave me this advice once upon a time. They're like, it's way easier to remember the truth than a lie. Like once you start lying, then you have to remember the lie that you told. And like, it's just much easier to just tell the truth. So I like that, but also you have to remember sometimes you do have to kind of have this fake it till you make it kind of mentality in this life.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, when you're doing your decks, I think you want to be truthful yet aggressive, right? You don't want to present anything that you can't live up to, but people understand that sometimes that's aspirational. But it's like, in the diligence process, when you're, hiding something from the buyer, or are we waiting to the last second to sprig it on them in hopes that they're not going to care? Like that's not the way to build trust. That's not the way to build a relationship. So, that's what I would try to shy away from.
I like that because it's just hard for me to bridge those two things as well. But I think you've done it nicely. And I mean, you do have to lobby for yourself and tell your story in a well-presented way, in a strategic way. That is what everybody does. You don't just show up and like, look, let me just tell you all the worst stuff about my business. That's not how it works, but you can do it without trying to stretch the truth or hide things. And hopefully that works out for everybody. Although I know there are some people who just have lied through their teeth in this life and it's worked out well for them too. So, but we don't know them. We don't like that. We don't support them. All right. Let me ask you, I think kind of on this topic then, one last question here, which is, I think probably the tendency is for early stage brands to look at working with lawyers as, okay, how much is this going to cost me? Right? Like, oh God, this could escalate. And, but also there's like, you guys are partners to these brands, right? All of the advice that you've just given shows like there's a lot of stuff that you know and can be good strategic partners to them over time. So can you just talk a little bit more about like, how can people best work with you in that way and get the most out of you and your best thinking to really have a great, huge impact for them over the long run?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of hit on earlier, but like, as I mentioned, again, we view our clients as long-term partners. We're not in it to make a quick buck. We are in it to watch you succeed because that's what's exciting to us. Redlining contract, fine, that's great. But watching the ultimate success, that's what makes this job worthwhile and rewarding for us. So, I mean, yes, use us for the red lines, for the markups and all that stuff. Lean on our experience. But to that end, Gabby's probably represented 500 CPG brands. I probably represented 600 or 700. Our firm 3,000, right? So we have just this ingrained experience and knowledge in the industry. So, maybe you don't have the money for us to mark up your manufacturing agreement. We can just give you some bullet point advice. But also, we can just be advised. A good lawyer is more than just someone marking up a contract. They're an advisor. They're someone you go to with your questions, your concerns, and your successes, right? Something to be shared. So I think, oftentimes our clients think of us as almost their consigliere, right? They give us a call, a standing meeting for 30 minutes once a month just to pick our brain because we've seen what works, we've seen what fails. So I think once you find that right partner, to lean on them, not just for, the red lines or whatever, but really their industry knowledge. What can I expect from, this distributor? Or I'm going to go nationwide next month. What do I need to plan for? Or we have Expo West in 2 months. What the hell should I do, right? We've gone to Expo West for the past 10 years, so we can give you some advice, even if it's just not legal at all, right? So I think, once you find the right partners, whether it's legal or otherwise, lean on them, have that call with them once a month. Because people in this industry especially want to watch other people succeed. So they're happy to have those, 30-minute calls.
I like that. So making sure you're using your peacetime consigliere as well as your wartime consigliere. Okay, so Gabby.
Yeah, I think a lot of clients are nervous that lawyers are the ones who get in the way of signing documents. They're like, you're going to tell me all of these things I can't do. You're telling me I can't sign this agreement. You're telling me it's going to take another couple of days to get to be able to have the manufacturer start work. I think kind of reframing that into sort of making sure that you're partnering with somebody that's going to be protective of you. I think most founders in this space, but I think everybody sort of realizes we all have our different strengths. There are, people who are crushing branding. Could not be me. That is not my strong suit. So really leaning on people who have a different skill set, who have a different way of looking at things. And I think it's just a lawyer is just sort of part of your broader team, just like a CFO is not going to be doing the regional sales work, right? You need a lot of different people rowing these boats. And I think a lawyer, and not just us, but there are a lot of great lawyers in the CPG space who really have an industry knowledge and want to see the companies grow. And like Adam said, it's the reason we're in it, and the reason we do it is to see those exciting moments, to see the product on shelf, to see the billboard with the new face of. So just sort of thinking of it as more of a team sport all around.
Okay. And so one to end on with you, Gabby, I bet that like me, you guys love your jobs. This CPG industry is very fun. And probably, Gabby, when you are doing your best work, you get this very warm, fun feeling and you're excited that you're just crushing it for one of your clients. What can your clients do to get that out of you, where you are just I am just crushing it for them? They have set me up very well to do that for them because of the way that they engage me or interact with me, or the kind of info that they give me or help me understand certain things about the business. What would you say to brands out there? Make sure that you do this with your legal team.
Yeah, I think, and look, I totally understand it can be expensive, it can be daunting. And so you want to sort of get the quickest result with the shortest amount of interaction. But I think being really honest, and this is why, at the beginning, Adam talked about ask us for a quote, ask us how much it's going to cost, really align on expectations. And I think the more time you spend sort of at the beginning of a project, I know there's this rush to get things done, but the more time you spend at the beginning just to get aligned and on the same page, and what do you really want to get out of this? What are you looking to achieve? What are the things you're nervous about? What are the things that aren't going to be a problem? It actually cuts down on a lot of cost, and it cuts down on a lot of time. The more we know at the beginning, maybe we only have to do 1 or 2 drafts of this. We revise the draft, we send it to the other side, we make a couple of cleanups, we change. Can't tell you the number of times where it's like we're 4 revisions in because it's like, well, I don't know if I really feel good about this. I've thought more about this and I'm not sure that this really works for us. So not being shy with really, what the expectation is and what you're looking to see out of it, I think is the most important piece.
That is a great answer. Adam, let me come back around to you because I'm sure you have some thoughts on that as well, as many clients as you have worked with.
No, I think that was the right answer. Like, get alignment early, right? We're used to demanding clients. We can take the late nights and the long hours, but getting alignment early helps. An occasional thank you also goes a long way. I think, it kind of goes back to like the term sheet stuff, right? Like getting everything kind of an understanding early, ask us for a quote. And, if you tell us, I want 1 markup and I'll take it from here, great. And if you want us to hold your hand all the way through it, we're going to do that too. But like, let's just make sure that we're all thinking the same thing, because nothing makes a client more angry than getting a bill that they weren't expecting, right? So I just want to be sure that me and you are aligned from the get-go, such that there's no surprise bills, there's no unexpected costs. Because again, I got harp on this, but we're all about partnership. And, you getting a bill that's twice as much as you thought isn't really what a good partner does.
I love it. That's really good advice. I hope that all clients you onboard get that kind of a tip, so they should all listen to this episode clearly. All right. And then just to end, I also really want to thank the whole team at Giannuzzi Lewendon for being one of the sponsors for our recent Founders and Funders event, which was a magical experience. It was the culmination of 6 months of work from my team, where we had the top 70 early stage VCs really actively writing checks for brands. We had 160 brands there. We facilitated 600 one-on-one meetings, and the content was incredible. I think the biggest complaint we heard is like, I was so busy taking my one-on-one meetings. I had like 15 in a row that I missed some of the panels that I really wanted to get to as well, which we'll work on that feedback as well, but that's a good problem to have. Adam, I'm wondering, just because I know you got to be there for the full day, any reflections on what it was like? What would you tell someone who wasn't there about what it was like to be there for the event?
I mean, definitely apply. It was great. It literally had speakers from across the spectrum dropping so much knowledge, right? You had founders who have succeeded, you had lawyers, you had investors, but they provided really beneficial guidance. And then frankly, just going out and being able to meet and touch all these new brands was super rewarding. And if you were there and I didn't see you and I didn't get to try your product, I'm sorry. But send me some, and happy to hop on a Zoom discuss. But no, it was just a great process, and it's only get better.
I love it. Well, thank you guys again for your support. It was a really high impact event, and we have already heard about a lot of checks actually getting written from it. And that was our goal, was just to help the early stage brands, really figure out who is really writing the checks and hopefully get some of those checks. And then they will then probably have the kind of traction they need to go and hire you guys to get them properly set up to receive those checks. All right.
Perfect.
So thank you guys again, everybody. Please feel free to reach out to the Giannuzzi Lewendon team. We'll have their contact information here in the show notes. So thank you, everybody. I hope you learned as much as I did.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, my friends, we've now arrived together at the end of another episode of the Startup CPG Podcast, the top globally ranked podcast in CPG. As you may know, we're not just a podcast, we're a community of brands and experts, and you should join. You can sign up at startupcpg.com. You'll then get an invite to our online Slack community. You're going to hear about amazing events near you, all of our special opportunities to get you in front of buyers, investors, brands, and more. It's a free community, so what are you waiting for? I will see you there or on our next episode. Bye-bye!